I remember the exact sound of my shoes against the courthouse floor that morning, polished marble whispering back my steps like it already knew what kind of battle I had walked into. Portsmouth, Virginia, October 2024. The air was sharp, early fall crispness slipping under my collar as if trying to remind me that cold could be clean and honest while people often were not. The moment I crossed the threshold, the room changed. Not loud, not sudden, just a subtle tightening in the air like everyone took one quiet breath at the same time and held it. I had worn my navy dress blues pressed the night before, brass-polished ribbons aligned by muscle memory that never left me. I served 12 years retired with a knee held together by patience and steel screws, and even now, walking in a military uniform brought me a mix of pride and the echo of faces and names I could never say again. The bruise on my cheek had faded from violet to a sick yellow-green, not from war and not from training, but from home, the one battlefield nobody warns you about. I kept my chin steady. They did not deserve to see me flinch. My father stood near the front broad shoulders, stiff under a suit that never looked like it belonged to him, jaw tilted like he owned the room. When he saw me, his lips tugged into that slow, small sneer, the same expression he used when I was 8 and could not lift a hay bale. The same one he used when I left for buds, telling me real strength never needed uniforms or medals. My mother beside him looked at me without blinking, her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes sliding over the bruising without concern, without guilt, without anything except cold pride in the story she preferred over the truth. She did not look shocked. She looked bothered that I showed up at all, especially dressed like this. Two older women on the first bench leaned toward each other, whispering, "Was she a SEAL?" I heard the uncertainty, not disbelief. More like awe translated into a hesitant question. A deputy near the door straightened when he noticed the Navy Cross ribbon. I kept moving, my knee aching, but my pace steady, not quick, not defiant. Just controlled the way they trained us to enter a room, sweeping the space with a soft glance, gathering information without telegraphing anything. Pain is temporary, and so is fear. That thought pulsed in my chest like a heartbeat. I had repeated it in the surf when waves dragged me under and the instructor shouted to quit. I repeated it when I watched friends lowered under folded flags. And I repeated it last week when my father lifted his hand again after all these years and my mother stood still and silent in her kitchen, pretending not to see. I took my seat at the defense table alone. No attorney. I had called 6. They all knew my father, the man who led the volunteer fire fundraisers and coached Little League a pillar of the community, as long as no one looked too closely. The judge entered gray hair steady presence, eyes tired but kind. When he saw me, he paused just a fraction of a second, not out of surprise, but recognition. I did not bow my head. I met his gaze. Discipline is a quiet language, and respect does not beg. My father leaned slightly toward my mother and whispered something sharp enough to cut, though I could not hear it. Her face tightened. He expected me to snap, to raise my voice, to defend myself in a way that made me look unhinged. He always thrived on reaction, but I had learned long ago that silence can be armor and dignity can be louder than any accusation. I rested my hands lightly on the table, feeling the wood cool against my palm, grounding me. Ranger. My retired working dog was not here. Courtroom rules, but I could still feel the ghost weight of him leaning against my leg the way he did when nightmares pulled me awake. A man near the back scoffed quietly like he assumed I wore the uniform to get sympathy. Let them think that. Truth does not need their permission. When the bailiff called the case name Holt versus Holt, my stomach dipped just once, then steadied. My life had been measured in deployments, in missions, in losses, and homecomings. This was simply another operation. Only difference was the enemy shared my face shape and my last name. The judge looked down at his papers, then up at me again, like confirming something. "Commander Holt," he began. 2 words, and the room altered. My father stiffened. My mother blinked once, then drew a slow breath through her nose like she hated every syllable. "Commander, not daughter, not problem, not disappointment. Commander, I rolled my shoulders back just a fraction. Nothing dramatic, just reclaiming an inch of space they stole for decades. People always imagine justice arrives with noise, but sometimes it comes in soft moments, tiny shifts in power that feel like sunrise cracking a long night open. I did not smile. I did not break. I let the silence answer for me. If you have ever walked into a room where your existence alone was an act of defiance, stay with me. This story is not about anger. It is about earning peace in a world that tried to take it. And I was only just beginning. Norfolk, Virginia. 2 days before the courthouse doors swung open on me and on decades of things never said. The river outside my small house moved slow and steady like it had nowhere to rush and nothing left to prove. The American flag on my porch fluttered just enough to remind me I was home. Yet that word sat strangely in my chest because home was supposed to hold safety and softness, not bruises hidden under foundation or memories that pressed on the ribs from the inside out. Morning light filtered through the blinds, painting thin lines across the kitchen counter where a mug waited a familiar routine that felt like armor. I moved carefully, one hand braced lightly on the edge of the counter as I lowered myself into the chair, and the dull ache in my right knee answered with its usual complaint. The injury never fully left, not after the blast outside Al Coot in 2021, the one that slammed me into the side of a vehicle and left metal where bone used to be. That pain was honest, though, and honesty, however sharp, is easier to live with than betrayal that smiles across a dinner table. I breathed in deeply, letting the smell of fresh coffee fill my lungs, as if caffeine alone could stop old memories from creeping up when the world felt too still. Ranger lifted his head from where he lay near my boots, ears flicking tail, thumping once slow and steady loyal even in quiet moments that had no commands, no missions, no noise. He rose, stretching long muscles, then padded towards me, nudging my hand with his muzzle gentle, like he knew mornings sometimes shook inside me before they steadied. "Good boy," I murmured, fingers moving through his fur, the familiar grounding sensation pulling me back into the present. On the table in front of me, the cream-colored envelope sat unopened again, though I had already read its contents enough times to know the ink by heart. Summons to Portsmouth Family Court. Petition for property claim. Abandonment of family homestead. The date printed in clean legal font tomorrow morning. My name written without affection or hesitation, Commander Avery Holt. Even after all the years, even after the deployments, even after surgeries and funerals and folded flags, my parents found a way not to speak to me, but to send a document instead. I held the mug between both hands, letting warmth seep into my fingers, while the thought lingered cold that sometimes the greatest distance between people is not miles, but silence. Ranger leaned his head against my leg, eyes soft and steady like he was cataloging the tension in my breath, the same way he once tracked adrenaline spikes and subtle shifts in the air during patrol sweeps. The body remembers patterns long after the world changes. I rested my palm on his neck and let myself feel the steadiness of him, a living reminder that loyalty does exist, just not always where we hope for it first. Outside the window, 2 gulls glided above the river-white wings, bright against the morning. The world looked clean untouched, like it did not know how easily peace can crack. My phone screen lit with a reminder court appearance in 48 hours. I did not need it. My mind had been counting down like it used to track mission time before breaching a compound quiet. Focus, slow breathing, steady pulse. I turned the envelope over again, smoothing the crease in the paper, then set it back down because looking at the problem and solving it were not the same thing. Preparation happens in silence long before the moment you are seen. I took a deep breath, and the air shifted enough to let a memory slip through uninvited. 1 week earlier, my mother's birthday. Her kitchen smelled like vanilla and lemon cleaner the way it always did when she wanted things to look perfect for guests. I had come because I still believed showing up mattered, because I still carried the faint, foolish thread that maybe age softens resentment, that maybe time could press gentleness into people, the way water shapes stone. She stood on a small stool reaching for the high cabinet where she kept the good plates, and her foot slipped wood, scraping tile, a brief panic noise. I moved fast, instinct, not thought, catching her elbow, steadying her before she fell. "You all right?" I asked, soft but ready to brace again. Before she answered, before she breathed, my father appeared, jaw tight, eyes sharp like he walked in looking for a fight, not a moment to understand. He saw her. Startled, he saw me holding her, and his face twisted into something I recognized too well. Accusation born not from truth, but from habit. "Let her go," he barked, stepping close, voice low, like anger simmering under years of pride. I opened my mouth to explain, but the hand flew quicker than the thought. A sharp sting shocked my cheek, then heat bloomed across the skin, the kind that rises before shame or pain has time to argue with reason. My mother did not shout, she did not defend, she did not even look at him. She only adjusted her sleeve, smoothed her hair, and whispered, "Let us not make a scene," as if I had caused the trouble by trying to stop someone from getting hurt. I remembered the sound my breath made, then shallow, like the air had been knocked from the part of me that still expected better. I walked out, not slamming the door, because anger loud and reckless belonged to him, not me. Back in my kitchen now, the bruise hidden beneath a touch of makeup felt heavier than swollen skin. It felt like a conclusion that had taken decades to reach. Family does not earn loyalty through blood. They earn it through behavior. Ranger nudged my knee again, and I let out a slow breath, letting the memory fall away like sand through fingers. I stood carefully, feeling the knee stiffen, then loosen with movement. My dress blues hung in the bedroom, pressed and ready. They were not about vanity or spectacle. They were proof of who I became, despite everything, and sometimes survival is the most disciplined form of defiance there is. I glanced again at the envelope, then at the quiet river, and whispered more to myself than to the room, "I am ready." Not eager, not angry, just ready. Silence answered, but this time it felt like strength, not absence. The summons did not surprise me, not really. Shock would have required trust, and there had not been trust in that house for decades. Still, the weight of the paper, the neat county stamp, the formal tone, trying to turn history into legal phrasing, it all settled on me like the moment before surf training when the ocean goes still, and you know the next wave will not be merciful. I turned the envelope over again, my fingers tracing the seal, the same way they once traced bruises hidden beneath long sleeves, before the Navy gave me uniforms and purpose, and rooms where silence meant discipline, not punishment. I left home at 18, not in a dramatic escape, but quietly at dawn with a duffel bag and a scholarship letter, and the understanding that staying would cost me more than leaving ever could. Some people run from danger. Some walk out before it decides to swallow them whole. I walked. My father had stood in the doorway that morning, arms crossed, making himself look bigger like he always did when he felt something slipping out of his control. "You think you are strong," he said, voice low enough not to wake neighbors. "You are running to hide with the military because it's for weak men and stupid daughters who can't make it in the real world." I remember the quick sting in my chest, not from the words themselves, but from the realization that he believed them. He needed to believe them because admitting otherwise would mean acknowledging there was strength in choosing your own life instead of inheriting someone else's bitterness. My mother stood behind him, her hands twisting a dish towel, eyes darting toward the stairs like she wished someone wiser, braver, kinder would walk down and stop him. No one did. She whispered something like, "Be safe," but it floated away, as if embarrassed to exist. The hardest goodbye is the one where no one tries to stop you. Years passed. Military training hardened my muscles but softened the part of me that once thought love should hurt, or that loyalty was owed simply because of blood. I learned loyalty in sand and salt and sweat, in teammates who held the line, and in commanders who said good job without needing to raise their voice to feel powerful. That was where I found family, not in a kitchen that smelled like bleach and fear, but on ships and in briefing rooms and under desert skies where men and women stood shoulder to shoulder because they believed in something larger than themselves. And now, a court document sat on my table accusing me of abandoning something I never truly had. Abandonment of family property. A phrase written with legal politeness that did not ask who kept the lights on in that house, or who paid taxes for 10 years, or who left because staying meant turning into someone bitter and breaking quietly. Chesapeake farmland. My grandfather's land. He built that house with his own hands back when honesty and sweat were currency, and pride came from work, not control. He used to tell me there is strength in silence, but only if the silence is chosen, not forced. I kept that line tucked in my mind the way some people keep prayers. When he passed, the will came addressed to me, not my father. I never asked why. I did not need to. Some values skip generations and find the one willing to hold them. My phone buzzed that morning, cutting through memory. Mrs. Whitaker. She used to live 2 houses down from us when I was a kid, a woman with gentle hands who baked peach cobbler in the summer and hummed old hymns on her porch swing. Miss Avery. Her voice trembled like she hated calling, like she hated being the bearer of someone else's poison. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I thought you should know your daddy telling the church your service is shameful." Shameful. A word that has sharp edges when aimed at someone who spent years teaching young recruits how to breathe through fear, how to move with discipline, how to stand even when the world trembled. I felt a strange stillness spread through me, not anger, not grief, just quiet recognition. There it was, the same pattern dressed in Sunday clothes. When they cannot control your steps, they try to control your story. "Thank you for telling me," I said, steady voice, even though my grip tightened slightly around the phone. She sighed a sound that carried old sadness. "We know better, honey, a lot of us do. Some folks speak loud because they got nothing steady inside them." Her words settled around me, gentle but true. When the call ended, I stared out the window at the river again and remembered how that land in Chesapeake smelled in summer like cut grass and wood smoke. I remembered my grandfather showing me how to sand a piece of cedar smooth enough to catch morning light. I remembered his hand resting on my shoulder the day I left for basic, saying, "You come back strong and you come back kind." I had kept both promises, and yet here I was, accused of abandonment by people who abandoned decency long before I ever packed a bag. I set the summons down, feeling its weight, but also feeling something steadier beneath it. Not anger, not fear, but resolve forged over years of proving quietly that strength does not need to shout. 2 days. 48 hours until a courtroom full of strangers heard the story my parents spent years trying to bury under pride and rumor. I reached for my mug again, letting the warmth steady me. Ranger rested his head on my knee again, steady, constant, loyal. I whispered more to myself than to him. They can claim the land in court, but they will never own the truth. The river outside moved on, unbothered, calm, persistent, a reminder that real strength flows forward, not backward. And so would I. There are wounds that never bleed, yet never close, and mine began long before the Navy, before sand and salt and steel, before the medals and the folded flags and the silent stares from men who had seen too much. They started in a house where the walls remembered raised voices better than laughter, and where the quiet after an argument felt heavier than the argument itself. People like to believe childhood is soft, that it is filled with birthday candles and scraped knees and warm embraces that smell like laundry soap and comfort. Mine was measured in locked cabinets and money counted down to the penny in tightly controlled calendars, and the unspoken rule that love was earned, not given. My father liked to hold power in small ways first. Ways he could deny amounted to anything. He locked the refrigerator after 9 o'clock because he did not want us wasting food. He kept the car keys in his pocket even when my mother needed groceries because he believed planning better was a sign of strength. The television remote lived in his drawer, and the phone in the hallway hung high enough that only he could answer it unless he decided otherwise. If control had a shape, it would look like things that should have been ordinary turning into permissions that could be taken away. When I turned 14, the house rules shifted from irritating to suffocating. If I wanted school supplies, he gave me exact change. If I wanted to join an after-school club, he demanded a written schedule and proof it was productive. When I wanted a phone like other kids had, he bought the cheapest one and kept it in his tool chest unless he believed there was a proper reason to use it. Privacy was considered rebellion and questions were considered disrespect. My mother moved through the house like a ghost in pearl earrings and pressed blouses, smiling in church and bowing her head over dinner, but never lifting her eyes when his tone hardened or when I stood a little straighter, trying not to flinch. That kind of quiet compliance trains you to listen to the air, not the words, to watch the tilt of a jaw, the hum of a refrigerator shutting off at night, the sound of keys hitting the counter like a warning. Control does not need fists to leave marks. It only needs time. I used to sit on the back steps at sunset, feeling splinters press into my palms, breathing the Virginia air thick with honeysuckle, and thinking, one day I will walk away from this and not come back. Some children dream of starry futures. I dreamed of a door opening outward. Navy ROTC was my lifeline, not because I had romantic ideas about uniforms or glory, but because I knew structure that teaches discipline without cruelty is rare and precious. At 17, I joined the program, and each morning run before school tasted like freedom. Each pull-up felt like rebellion measured in muscle and breath. My father thought it was a phase, then a challenge, then an insult. Every time I put on that cadet uniform, his eyes narrowed like I had stolen something from him by not fitting into the world he chose for me. Weak men and stupid daughters join the military, he said once while pouring coffee like he was talking about the weather, and I remember thinking, strength spoken loudly always tries to convince someone, and it usually tries to convince itself first. Graduation day felt like stepping into sunlight after years indoors. I left for basic training with a duffel bag and a quiet sense that I was finally breathing my own air. Buds, training was not salvation. It was another kind of storm, but storms can build or destroy depending on what you bring into them. The cold cut through every layer like truth, and the instructors' voices cracked across the beach like commands carved from stone. I failed tasks. I succeeded in others. I froze. I pushed. I tasted salt from sweat and surf until my skin felt like it belonged to the ocean more than to me. Stress fractures turned every step into a reminder that nothing worth having comes without cost, but that cost can be fuel, not defeat. Men twice my size dropped out not because they were weak, but because suffering tests more than muscle. It tests why you are standing there in the first place. My reason was simple. I was not running from home anymore. I was running toward myself. When I earned respect there, it came from merit, not fear. It came not from silence demanded, but from silence understood. My teammates and I shared cups of bitter coffee at dawn and stories that never left the room because they were stitched into our bones, not meant for the world. We learned to breathe underwater longer than comfort allowed, to move with precision in darkness, to hold each other's lives without hesitation. There is a trust in that world that civilian life rarely understands. Trust without conditions, without manipulation. Trust that says, if I fall, you lift, and if you fall, I carry. Lieutenant Mason Reed was one of those who never hesitated. He had a quiet laugh like he knew life was both heavy and worth carrying anyway. And he used to joke that the ocean made us honest because the ocean does not negotiate. We deployed together twice, and in dusty corners of Iraq, we learned the smell of diesel at dawn and the sound of distant engines and how to tell the difference between danger and stillness. One afternoon, a blast changed the air and then everything else. Dust and heat and sound that was not sound but impact, and then names on a report and a ceremony with folded flags. I remember standing in dress blues, feeling the fabric bite into my shoulders, while grief sat like a stone inside my chest. It did not break me, but it carved a space where I kept Mason and others like him who never came home. When the nightmares came later, they came not with horror, but with memory. Footsteps in sand, the hum of a Humvee engine, a laugh cut short by silence. I woke sometimes in Norfolk years later with my hand reaching out for a weapon that was not there, then felt Ranger press his weight against me, solid calm, trained to sense tension and break it with presence alone. PTSD, they called it, but labels do not tell the story. I functioned. I breathed. I served. I lived with echoes and learned that strength and vulnerability do not cancel each other. They coexist like tide and moon. Pain taught me to stand. Silence taught me to survive. And now, the quiet moments before court felt strangely familiar, like the pause before stepping into cold surf at dawn, knowing discomfort awaits, but so does purpose. The bruise on my cheek was not from battle overseas, but from a moment in a kitchen where truth collided with old habits. That wound ached differently because it came not from enemies, but from people who believed they owned my beginning and therefore my ending. They did not. They never would. Some wounds do not heal by forgetting. They heal by outgrowing the place that caused them. 2 days left. I felt the weight of my past not as chains, but as anchors that kept me steady. This time, I was not a child waiting for permission. I was a woman who had learned to stand in cold water until the world stopped trying to knock me down, and I would stand again. I did not expect an army of allies when it came time to prepare. Some battles are meant to be fought with a full unit at your back, and some require walking in alone, because silence and truth are the sharpest weapons you have left. Still, I figured I should at least try to find representation, if only to avoid the familiar accusation that I was reckless or emotional or unprepared. Rational steps. Calm approach. That is what training instills. So I called the first attorney on the list, a man whose office sat near the courthouse, someone people spoke highly of in town. His voice was pleasant enough at first until I told him my last name. Holt. A pause longer than it should have been followed. Then he cleared his throat and said he was fully booked. I called another. Same reaction, different excuse. A third chuckled softly and said, family disputes in small towns are tricky, and he would rather not get in the middle of something so delicate. Delicate. That word sat strange in my ear. Nothing about a history of intimidation wrapped in Sunday manners felt delicate. It felt practiced, controlled, familiar. I stopped calling after the sixth firm declined. Not because I lost hope, because frustration is a waste of energy when the mission remains unchanged. In the service, we learn that when support does not arrive, you assess, reevaluate, and keep moving. No panic, no theatrics, just adaptation. If I had to stand alone, I would stand steady. The next morning, I gathered every financial document tied to the Chesapeake property. Tax receipts from 2014 through 2024 lined the kitchen table like a timeline of quiet responsibility. Each year, stamped. Each amount withdrawn directly from my Navy pay, then later my disability pension. No gaps. No shared payments. While they held Sunday dinners and whispered grievances about sacrifice they never made, I kept that land from falling into debt. I did not boast about it. I did not send proof or ask for thanks. I simply did what was right because honor is not performance, it is consistency. I scanned each form, labeling and storing them in a digital file as methodically as I once packed ammunition and maps. A mission is a mission, whether it happens on foreign soil or in a Virginia kitchen. Ranger sat beside me, his chin resting near my ankle as if standing guard in a different kind of operation. Even retired, he kept watch in small ways. Loyalty endures long after uniforms are folded away. When the paperwork was done, I walked to the hallway closet where a small cedar box sat on the top shelf. It held nothing extravagant, nothing someone else would appraise as valuable. But to me, it was an inheritance richer than any farm or bank account or status. Inside lay my grandfather's compass brass. Slightly worn, the lid etched with two simple words he once spoke to me on a summer evening when fireflies floated like lanterns in the yard. Hold steady. As a child, I thought he meant keep still. Now I know he meant keep true. Do not let noise shake your direction. Do not let pride or fear or manipulation turn your legs weak or your spine soft. I turned the compass slowly in my hand and felt its weight. He carried this during his service in the Pacific. Lands far away. Battles I only know through fragments, and his gentle voice telling me sometimes war is not loud. Sometimes it is just waking up every day and choosing decency when bitterness would be easier. I closed the lid with care and returned the box to its shelf, but the words remained like a hum inside my chest. The sun was slipping low by then, casting copper and gold across the living room. My dress blues hung in the bedroom doorway, catching that fading light. I had steamed them the night before, pressing each crease until it held sharp and precise. Not for vanity, not for show. Uniforms carry weight beyond fabric. They hold memory sacrifice names whispered in ceremonies, nights spent awake in distant places listening for threats, days spent training until muscle forgot hesitation. Wearing them to court was not about intimidation. It was about identity. Stand as who you are, not who they pretend you are. Some would misinterpret the choice, but interpretation belongs to the loud. Meaning belongs to the steady. I ran my hand down the sleeve, feeling the smooth texture and the subtle heaviness from the medals pinned along the chest. My mother had once said medals make people boastful. She never understood they make people humble if they know what each ribbon cost. I set the uniform back on its hanger and sat at the edge of the bed, breathing slowly. letting the upcoming morning settle into place like gear before a jump. The body knows when change approaches. It listens to breath, to heartbeat, to the slight tremor in fingers that is not fear but anticipation. Missions never truly leave the blood. Courts are not battlefields, yet both require disciplined composure and readiness to stand firm when challenged. I imagined the courtroom not as a chamber of judgment, but as another obstacle course testing balance and resolve. Evidence is footing. Truth is breath. Composure is armor. I leaned forward, resting elbows on my knees, the bruise on my cheek pulling slightly, reminding me of the kitchen a week ago, the slap, the silence, and the decision to leave without raising my voice. Even in pain, restraint is a form of power. That night, as darkness settled, I walked to the porch. The river moved quiet under moonlight. Calm surface, deep current. I let the cool air fill my lungs and said aloud, though no one stood near, I am not going to prove worth. I am going to protect truth. There is a difference, and I finally know it. Ranger nudged my leg, then lay at my feet, head on his paws, content and watchful. Tomorrow, I would not walk into court seeking pity. I would carry my past not as burden, but as record. Tax forms, service history, a compass teaching steadiness, a uniform chosen not to demand respect, but to honor the path that shaped me. Some cases are won long before the judge speaks. They are won in the integrity of preparation, in the calm certainty that no matter how loud someone else tries to rewrite history, truth stands on its own legs. Mine had walked through cold surf and desert heat and rooms where doubt tried to seep in. They were not shaking now. The night air whispered against the flag, and I watched it lift, then settle again. Tomorrow would come whether I feared it or not, so I chose neither. I chose readiness. And readiness feels a lot like peace when you finally stop asking for permission to exist. The courthouse hallway smelled like old paper and polished wood when I arrived that first morning, the kind of scent that carries decades of whispered arguments and heavy footsteps and justice handed down in voices firm and calm. I walked through the metal detector the way I once walked through mission checkpoints, steady and controlled, eyes forward, not rushed and not hesitant. My dress blues felt familiar against my shoulders, weight settling like memory, not pressure. The security officer nodded to me with a respectful good morning, and though I did not smile, my chin dipped slightly in acknowledgement. Years in uniform carve habits you do not unlearn simply because the world changed around you. The courtroom was half full already. Farmers in jackets worn with years of work, older couples leaning toward each other, men in clean pressed shirts who looked like they came directly from offices downtown. Conversations died into murmurs as I stepped inside. I heard the soft intake of breath from someone in the second row, the sound someone makes when they see something unexpected but not unwelcome. Yet my parents watched none of that. They were waiting for me like anticipation itself sat stiff and cold beside them. My father sat upright, shoulders pulled back, trying to look like dignity, not confrontation. His gaze locked on me immediately. No warmth, only calculation, and that familiar pride sharpened into something colder. My mother sat beside him, hands clasped in her lap, pearls at her throat, like armor made of habit. Her eyes skimmed past me first, then returned slowly as though she had hoped the sight of me would soften if she gave it a moment. It did not. I took my place at the defendant's table, no attorney by my side. I felt the energy shift. Someone in the audience whispered, "Why is she alone?" And another voice answered, "Because she thinks the uniform will win for her." They were wrong, but they were not malicious. People cling to the explanations they understand. Silence filled the room for a beat long enough for the truth to settle, long enough for my father to lean forward, voice low but audible enough for the room to catch it. "She is broken. Look at her bruises." His tone was almost casual, like he was pointing out a stain on a shirt or a crack in a window, not labeling his own daughter as defective in front of strangers. There was no concern in his voice, only triumph, as if pain on my skin proved something he always believed. A couple in the back row glanced at my cheek, expecting me to shrink or flush. I did neither. My posture did not change, shoulders, straight hands folded lightly in front of me, eyes fixed forward. I had faced worse than whispers, and I had done it under far harsher lights than fluorescent bulbs. My mother exhaled just loud enough to be heard and murmured she abandoned us as though delivering fact, not fiction, her expression caught between wounded propriety and satisfaction. I did not look at her. Eye contact would have given too much power. There was a time I would have searched for softness in her face for a flicker of doubt or regret. That time was gone. The judge entered then, robes settling around him as he sat, glasses perched low on his nose. He scanned the room once, then looked at the case file before him. Holt versus Holt. When his gaze lifted and landed on me, something changed in his eyes. Not judgment, recognition. He shifted slightly, straightening in his seat before speaking. "Commander Holt, ma'am, you served." It was not really a question, but the courtroom leaned into the moment anyway. I felt every pair of eyes shift toward me again, not with suspicion now, but with curiosity edged by respect. Some people in that room had likely only seen uniforms on television or folded into shadow boxes hanging in living rooms. Seeing one here changed something in the air. "Yes, Your Honor." I answered, my voice steady, unhurried. Not loud, not fragile, controlled. You could hear discipline in the tone if you knew what to listen for. The judge nodded once, acknowledging a fact that meant something beyond record or duty. My father shifted in his seat jaw, tightening the word commander, echoing in his posture like a challenge he did not know how to answer. My mother's hands tightened around each other, but she said nothing. Silence sometimes reveals more than speech. A woman in the third row whispered softly. I knew it, and a man beside her murmured the Navy Cross, right. I think I saw her picture years ago. Their voices did not swell, but they moved through the room the way truth does when it surfaces without ceremony. My father tried again, voice sharper this time. She has always been dramatic. She thinks that uniform hides how she turned her back on her family. He said it with a confidence that belonged to someone used to controlling the narrative for decades, someone who forgot that real authority listens before it claims. I did not look at him. My gaze stayed on the judge and on the table where my documents rested neatly stacked, each year of tax payment, ready, each piece of evidence chosen with the same precision I once used to pack gear before stepping into hostile terrain. Abandonment is a strong claim, the judge said slowly, eyes scanning my father's side of the room. He lifted one eyebrow slightly, a gesture subtle but pointed. And yet, your daughter has served this nation. A weight dropped into the air. No condemnation in his voice, just an awareness, a question hovering between lines. My father opened his mouth to answer, but the judge raised one hand softly, stalling the impulse. Commander Holt, he continued, we will review all evidence. I responded with a simple, yes, sir. No tremor in my voice, no tears. My face remained composed, breath, even expression unreadable to anyone who did not understand the language of calm under pressure. There was a strength in not giving them the spectacle they might have expected. My bruise did not define me here. My uniform did not plead. The room settled into silence, but it was a different silence than at the start. This one held uncertainty questions, shifting loyalties. Someone coughed lightly in the back. Papers rustled. Ranger was not at my feet yet. I felt as though he was steady presence woven into my memory. The judge moved to the first formal question, but the emotional tone had already shifted. The narrative they arrived with cracked just slightly like ice under the first warm day, and all I had done was walk in, stand still, and answer with truth. The rest would come with time and patience. I did not have to win the room. I only had to hold steady. When the judge began reading the opening statements, I let the noise fade and felt the quiet strength that came from knowing I had already survived 1,000 mornings harder than this. My father's words echoed, but they no longer hit their mark. She is broken. No, I was tempered, and there is a difference. Tears never rose. Rage never surfaced posture, never wavered. The first day in court had begun, and I had entered not as a daughter, desperate to be seen, but as a woman prepared to stand tall even when those who should have lifted her tried instead to drag her down. Some battles do not start with noise. They start with stillness, and I held still. The first files slid across the polished table with a quiet certainty that felt louder than any outburst my father could have imagined. Paper is unassuming until it speaks. Dates lined in steady sequence, amounts paid year after year, signatures that never wavered. Proof layered like armor, not meant to shine, but meant to hold. I placed each page slowly, deliberately, letting the weight of time settle between us. The judge adjusted his glasses and examined the documents, brows drawing together, then lifting as recognition formed. "These payments extend back a decade," he murmured. "Every year, without fail." "Yes, Your Honor," I replied. The transfer was originally through my active duty automatic allotment. After medical retirement, I paid manually from my pension. My voice stayed neutral, steady. Calm is not weakness. It is evidence of control earned the hard way. The judge tapped one finger lightly on the tax ledger. So the property was not abandoned. My father shifted in his seat, discomfort rippling through his posture like a ripple in shallow water. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Silence answered where excuses once lived. The judge continued reviewing until he stopped entirely, his gaze lingering not on the numbers but on my name. He leaned back slightly, recognition dawning like a memory rising through years. "Commander Holt," he began slowly, eyes studying me with new clarity. "I believe I recall your name from a ceremony in 2021. Navy Cross honoree. Hall of Heroes." The room changed temperature. My mother blinked hard, as if trying to align the man she remembered raising with the woman in front of her. My father's stiffened jaw tightening into something that was not pride, not love, but disbelief that the world had recognized something he had refused to see. I did not move. I did not smile. Recognition is not reward. It is simply truth arriving where it was once denied. "Yes, Your Honor," I answered. "Iraq humanitarian convoy incident response evacuation under fire." A murmur moved through the seats like wind in dry grass. "People do not forget certain honors, not in Virginia, not among those who know the price of them." The judge's voice softened not in pity, but in respect. "I remember that day." The Secretary of Defense spoke. "Your family was not there." The words hung for a moment, not accusation, but observation sharpened by memory. My father swallowed throat, working his denial, trapped beneath the honesty of public record. Before anyone could speak, I slid a small silver USB drive forward. "Additional evidence." "Your Honor," the judge nodded. "Please proceed." A bailiff plugged it into the courtroom screen. The video began without sound at first. Police body camera footage. A domestic disturbance call from 1 week earlier. The video stabilized on a familiar kitchen. My mother stumbling as she reached toward a cabinet. Me stepping forward, catching her arm before she fell. My father entering, anger simmering in his eyes, misreading, reacting. A hand rising, a strike, the thud of contact. Then my voice, calm, steady, saying, "I am not doing this again." Not filmed in secret, recorded by the law he trusted to protect his version of the narrative. The room breathed in sharply as sound came through. His voice filled the speakers furious sharp, like it used to sound coming down a hallway when I was a child. "You always think you know better. You always think you're something." The bailiff paused the footage when I raised my hand lightly. "That is sufficient, Your Honor." The judge nodded slowly, absorbing the reality not just written in ink, but alive in movement, sound, and context. Several in the audience shifted uncomfortably. The man who had earlier whispered about my uniform now looked at me differently. Not as something to judge or admire, but something to respect. Pain, when witnessed, becomes truth instead of accusation. My father finally spoke, voice rough. "That video is out of context. You antagonize. You provoke. You always have." He sounded smaller than the sound system, smaller than the truth echoing off the courtroom walls. My mother lifted a trembling hand to her pearls, eyes, wide cheeks pale. Not from guilt, perhaps, but from seeing the story she curated crack open in front of strangers. The judge looked at them both evenly, then back to me. "Commander Holt, you displayed restraint in the video. You disengaged. You attempted to de-escalate. That aligns with your training." I nodded once. "Violence is pressure without discipline. I prefer control." A few people murmured appreciation under their breath. Not applause, just acknowledgement. Real respect rarely arrives loudly. My father sneered again, clinging to pride like driftwood. "She thinks discipline makes her better." And there it was, the root. Not love, not worry, competition. In the moment he tried to weaponize the past, the room saw him clearly in the present. My mother tried a softer angle, her voice trembling but edged with practiced fragility. She abandoned us. "You do not understand." She left. The judge did not blink. He turned to me. "Commander, why did you leave home originally?" I kept my eyes forward. "To survive and to serve." The judge paused and the gallery fell quiet. That sentence held both pain and purpose without needing decoration. The judge cleared his throat, voice now firm. "I want to make something clear. Service to this nation is not abandonment. Providing financial support to a family property is not abandonment. Protecting oneself from harm is not abandonment." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Authority spoken softly carries more weight than shouting ever could. My father exhaled sharply, frustration and defeat intertwined. The judge continued. "The court will review remaining evidence, but preliminary review strongly indicates Commander Holt upheld duty, responsibility, and integrity throughout." The mood shifted fully now, not sympathy. Respect. A slow, quiet turning of opinion from doubt to conviction, from suspicion to honor. Someone in the back nodded. One older veteran in a cap touched 2 fingers to his forehead in a subtle salute. I did not return it outwardly, but inside, something loosened, not victory, but validation earned through years of silence, not spectacle. I folded my hands again and waited. Let truth work. Let noise fade. Let those who doubted watch dignity take shape, not demanded, simply lived. Public exposure did not humiliate me. It revealed them. Honor is not a speech. It is a posture, and mine did not bend. When the gavel fell that first day, the courtroom emptied the way a battlefield clears after smoke lifts, and no one quite knows whether they won or simply survived. People walked past me with quiet nods, not loud praise, but something steadier, the kind of acknowledgement that comes from watching someone hold ground rather than swing wildly. My parents did not look at me when they left. My father's shoes struck the floor too hard, each step a declaration that retreat was only temporary. My mother followed, shoulders, rigid, hands trembling as she gripped her purse strap like it could hold her together. Outside, clouds hugged the sky, low and gray thick, like coastal storms, before the ocean decides whether to calm or rage. I stepped into the air, and it felt heavier than when I arrived, as though truth itself had weight. Several familiar local faces lingered near the courthouse steps, talking in hushed circles. They looked at me the way people look at a storm they misjudged. Not afraid exactly, just startled that it did not break where they expected it would. I walked past them without pause. Respect isn't in looks. Respect lives in silence, earned. That evening, the whispers spread faster than the tide near the bay. I did not hear them directly, but news travels its own channels through church pews polished by decades of Sunday clothes, through diner booths sticky with coffee rings, through front porches where men in flannel jackets judged the world as though they built it. My father made his rounds, voice raised not in grief, but in indignation. "She thinks a medal makes her better. She left us. She forgot who raised her. And the one I knew was coming, the one meant to cut me from community like a frayed rope. She ain't a hero. She's a failed vet who hides behind a uniform to cover up her shame." The words slid through town like oil on water, slick and unsteady, but spreading just the same. When pride feels threatened, truth becomes an enemy faster than any foreign adversary ever could. My brother Ryan called once. The phone lit up with his name. I let it ring. Some calls do not come to heal. They come to pull you back into a place you fought hard to walk away from. Within a day, my mother's closest church friends sent gentle messages, all variations of a single idea wrapped in prayer language. Maybe you should find humility. Strange how humility is always demanded from the one who already practiced it. I did not respond. Silence protects when words would only feed fire. Instead, I drove to my grandfather's land. The house stood quiet at the end of the gravel drive, paint peeling at the edges like old memories shedding their skin. The porch sagged, slightly weary from years, and the screen door creaked with a tired dignity. It was not a grand place, not in money, but in meaning. It held more than any estate ever could. I set down my tools on the worn boards, and Ranger trotted ahead, sniffing the airtail swaying in slow patrol rhythm. Fixing that house felt less like labor and more like reclaiming breath. I sanded porch railings while afternoon sunlight filtered through oak branches overhead. Dust settled on my sleeves like old history rediscovering its place. Boards groaned as I replaced nails one by one. The hammer's rhythm steadied me heartbeat to wood to ground. Noise from town did not reach me here. Anger did not either. Out here, the world listened. My phone buzzed with a message. "You embarrassed him. He's hurting. Come home." My mother's number. I set the phone face down. Pain does not excuse cruelty. And I had learned long ago that going back to the fire does not make you noble. It makes you burned. The next morning at the farm, I patched the fence line, hands rough with splinters, knees pressed into soil that had seen generations rise and fall. Work does not ask what others think. Work tells the truth without voice. A neighbor drove by, slowly window lowered. Older man face lined with sun and years. He didn't stop, but he did raise 2 fingers in quiet greeting. Not loyalty, but acknowledgement. That was enough. As evening came, cicadas hummed their late summer song low and steady. Ranger lay in the shade watching shadows stretch across the yard. I wiped sweat from my brow and glanced at the compass hanging from a nail near the doorway. "Hold steady." The words seemed to breathe with me. My parents could gather allies. They could whisper sermons and sharpen rumors until they sounded holy. They could convince people I was ungrateful, dramatic, dangerous to their pride. They could call me a failed soldier, a shame, a disappointment dressed in medals. But they could not turn truth into dust. I survived worse voices, the ones inside a helmet during a firefight, the ones calling for medics under burning sky, the ones in my own chest asking if I could keep going when cold water crushed ribs and instructors waited to see whether breaking or bending would come first. So, yes, they could call me names, but I had already chosen mine. Commander, veteran, survivor, daughter by blood, not by allegiance. The house creaked softly as evening air cooled. I sat on the porch steps, a cold bottle of water in my hands, and let quiet fill the spaces where old wounds once lived. This was not escape. This was choosing the right battlefield. My father fought for pride. I fought for peace. Pride shouts. Peace builds. And I would keep building. The world darkened slowly. Ranger lifted his head, ears alert, watching the tree line. I rested my hand on his back, feeling muscle and memory beneath fur. We had both earned our rest. Behind me, the farmhouse stood taller than when I arrived. A little stronger, a little steadier, like me. Let them speak. Let them stir the town like wind through dry leaves. Storms pass. Foundations remain. And mine did not crack. I did not answer their war with noise. I answered with a hammer, a porch, a compass, and silence that did not break. Quiet is not surrender. Quiet is discipline. Quiet is strength. Quiet is the place you stand when others expect you to fall. I held steady, and the land held me back. The second morning tasted like metal in the air, the kind that hangs over training grounds just before a timed test, when breath is measured and the world holds still, waiting to see who will falter. I woke before the alarm muscle memory honed from years of early briefings and shipboard reveille. Ranger lay near the bedhead, lifting the second my feet touched the floor, as though sensing this day would not just pass, it would land. Outside the courthouse, clouds stretched low across the gray October sky, Virginia's autumn wind brushing against my uniform like it knew what I carried. Not anger, not fear, purpose. The lobby buzzed with quiet voices, morning footsteps, the smell of coffee and rain, damp coats. I walked in steady shoulders, squared under the weight of my dress blues. Heads turned again, but differently than before. Not curiosity recognition, not all approval, but awareness earned. My father stood near the front row, jaw-clenched tie, crooked, as though he dressed in a hurry or dressed with fury. My mother beside him, pearl necklace gleaming against a pale neck, hands twisting together like she was holding a rosary. But there was no prayer in her eyes, only worry sharpened by pride. The bailiff called the room to order, and the judge entered, his gaze, steady expression, unreadable. He looked at me once, not searching for fear, but checking for readiness. I gave him nothing except posture. The kind officers recognize, the kind that doesn't ask to be believed, it commands truth to stay in the light. Court will continue hearing evidence regarding Holt versus Holt, he said, voice firm but not cold. My father's lawyer rose first, beginning with a rehearsed speech about abandonment responsibility, moral duty, but his voice dimmed when the judge raised a hand. We will hear from witnesses now. The first was Ranger's veterinarian, Dr. Kerr. Evan's gray-haired glasses slipping down his nose, the kind of gentle steadiness that animals trust immediately. He glanced at me with quiet respect before speaking. I have treated Ranger Holt for joint degeneration shrapnel trauma and chronic stress injuries, he said. He was a deployed military working dog. Commander Holt adopted him upon his retirement and has covered every medical cost since. My father's lawyer tried to interrupt. That has nothing to do with a property case. The judge didn't flinch. It has to do with character dedication and care, he replied. Continue. Dr. Evans adjusted his glasses. Many veterans struggle to reintegrate. Most don't take on the burden of rehabilitating a wounded service dog. She did. Without hesitation. He paused. She treats that dog with more loyalty and respect than many families treat each other. The silence afterward was heavy, not dramatic, honest. Ranger sat at home, not in court, but I felt his presence like a heartbeat. My father shifted face, tightening. He hated evidence you couldn't shout down. A neighbor testified. Next, Mrs. Whitaker Hand's trembling voice, soft but clear. I've known Avery since she was a girl. I've seen the way she walked on eggshells in that house, heard yelling through the walls, saw bruises she hid. My father shot up fury, bursting before thought. She's lying. This is a family matter. The bailiff stepped forward sharply. Sir, sit down. I will not sit. His voice cracked like wood under pressure. She's turning strangers against their own family. The bailiff's hand hovered near his belt. Sir, he warned, voice like gravel in command. Sit. Down. My father sat, breath-ragged rage shaking his shoulders. My mother looked smaller now, clutching her purse like it could erase witness testimony. Mrs. Whitaker continued, voice trembling but anchored. When Avery enlisted, it wasn't rebellion. It was survival. She looked directly at the judge. Some homes break a person. The Navy didn't break her. It saved her. The lawyer attempted to object, but nobody listened. When truth rings, objections sound like static. Then the courtroom doors opened and every head turned. White-collar Navy chaplain uniform, polished shoes, steady stride. Chaplain Matthews, old-as-time voice, always calm eyes that looked through you and into the history you carried. My throat tightened. He wasn't called. He came. He laid one hand on the witness stand the way he once placed a hand on a flag-covered casket. Commander Holt served under my spiritual care, he said simply. I watched her lead with discipline and humility. I watched her carry others through fear without ever seeking recognition. My mother's eyes widened. My father looked like he swallowed gravel. Matthew's continued, voice quiet as prayer but sharp as a blade. Her loyalty is not loud. Loyal hearts rarely are. But I have buried men with medals who never showed half her courage. Not dramatic, not embellished. True. He turned to me briefly and nodded, and every deployment night flooded through my chest, chow hall sermons, flag-draped mornings whispered blessings before missions. The judge folded his hands. Chaplain. He said, in your opinion, did Commander Holt act in abandonment of family? Matthews shook his head slowly. She did not abandon them, he said. They abandoned her first. My mother flinched. My father stiffened as if absorbing a blow to the jaw. The judge inhaled deeply, set his glasses down, leaned forward. Service is honor, he said, voice low, resonant, final. Not abandonment. My father tried once more, voice frayed. You don't know what she's really like, sir. The judge cut in calm but lethal. I know what your daughter has done for this nation, and I know what she has done for the property you claim she abandoned. I also know what I heard in that footage. He paused, letting the room feel the weight. I see duty on one side, and resentment on the other. My father looked like a man realizing the battlefield he chose was built on sand. His chest rose, fell fury giving way to panic beneath pride. My mother's fingers twisted tighter, pearls digging into her skin like punishment. The judge looked directly at me. "Commander, do you have anything to say?" I shook my head once, voice even. Respectfully, "Your Honor, no. My record speaks." And it did. My silence wasn't weakness. It was control. The courtroom felt quieter than any night watch in Iraq, quieter than the second before breaching a compound door, quieter than grief. Respect doesn't always arrive with applause. Sometimes it arrives in the way people sit straighter, breathe slower, look away, not from shame, but reverence. My father exhaled like defeat tasted bitter. My mother blinked fast as if searching for the version of me she could belittle, but she could not find her anymore. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew war but chose peace, knew pain but wore dignity, knew abandonment but never practiced it. The gavel did not fall yet, but the shift already had. That day in a quiet courtroom in Virginia, I did not win with volume. I won with truth, and truth, when it stands tall, does not shout. It does not beg. It simply remains. I sat there, still breathing steady. Ranger wasn't in the room, but I swear I could feel him at my feet, guarding proud as if he knew. No battle is harder than the one fought against your own blood, and no victory cleaner than the one earned without hate. The storm inside the courthouse had broken, but another waited outside. Not against me, against denial. My family had fired first. The world had answered, and I held steady, each breath a choice, each silence a sentence, each stillness a stance. The war was shifting, and I did not move. Verdicts are not thunderclaps. They do not explode like doors kicked in during a raid. They settle. They land. They arrive with the gravity of long-carried truth finally allowed to sit down. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the fabric of my dress blues shift when I breathed. My father sat forward like a man bracing for impact, yet refusing to believe it would come. My mother folded her hands together so tightly her knuckles turned pale, as though she could still squeeze herself into the image of righteous victimhood she had worn like perfume for decades. The judge placed both hands flat on the bench. Steady, grounded. "This court has reviewed all evidence presented," he began, every syllable controlled, every pause purposeful. "Tax records testimony, documented service history, and video footage." He lifted one document lightly. "This is not merely a property dispute. It reflects a pattern of responsibility on one side and a pattern of resentment and intimidation on the other." My father's jaw tightened. His foot tapped once. A man trying to hold his body together while pride split him down the center. The judge continued, voice like the slow draw of a ceremonial flag rising in wind. "Commander Holt has maintained financial responsibility for the property in question for 10 years. She has not abandoned it. Nor has she abandoned family duty. Rather, the evidence shows she carried burdens that were not shared." My mother inhaled sharply as though the truth itself stung. My father opened his mouth, but the judge's gaze cut to him with quiet steel. He closed it again. "The petition to seize property is denied," the judge said, final and clean. "Full ownership remains with Commander Holt." A soft shift moved through the room. Not applause, not gasps, just the sound of perception realigning. Respect settling where doubt once lived. But the judge was not finished. He lifted the USB drive, its cold silver catching the courtroom light. "Additionally, this court cannot ignore the documented act of physical aggression toward Commander Holt." My father's face flushed red, climbing his neck like rage, trying to reclaim territory it had just lost. "A protective order is granted," the judge continued, "and fines will be issued for assault." My mother turned toward my father in shock, whispering his name like it might save them both. He jerked away, eyes flickering not toward me, but toward the gallery, checking to see who witnessed his fall. Pride does not bleed. It cracks. He stood halfway, voice shaking with humiliation rather than sorrow. "You ruined your family," he snapped at me as though accusation could still rewrite outcome. "You had to put on that costume and perform for strangers. The bailiff stepped forward with the same silent authority I once saw in seasoned platoon sergeants who could end a fight simply by standing in the doorway. "Sit," the bailiff murmured. My father froze. Sat. The bench groaned under the weight of a man learning he was not the strongest force in the room. The judge's voice cut the air clean again. "This court acknowledges Commander Holt's service and sacrifice, and we will not punish duty with confiscation." Then he looked at me not as a wounded woman, not as a case file, but as someone who had walked through fire and did not come asking for applause. "Commander," he said softly, "thank you." I did not smile. I did not nod with pride. I simply held myself upright. "Yes, sir," I answered. Recognition is never owed. It is only earned. My parents did not stand when court adjourned. They sat frozen in disbelief, staring not at the judge, not at the papers, but at the reality they had tried so hard to deny. I no longer lived under their definition. I no longer needed their permission to stand tall. I did not look at them. That was not cruelty. That was boundary. Sometimes the most powerful confrontation is refusal to meet eyes that only ever sought to belittle you. I gathered my folder slowly. Motions, disciplined breath, steady. The courtroom emptied, people moving around me with nods and soft acknowledgments, the kind reserved for someone who did not ask for sympathy, yet commanded respect. An older veteran touched my sleeve lightly. "Proud day," he murmured. I met his gaze briefly. "For what we carry," I said simply. He nodded. "For what we carry." Outside, sunlight hit the courthouse steps like a blessing or a challenge, depending on who you were in this story. My father and mother walked out behind me, but I did not turn. Their footsteps faltered as though they expected me to pause to glance back to seek even a flicker of reconciliation. But I had made peace with what could not be repaired. Some bridges burn not from anger, but because wood rots and crossing it again would only mean falling. I walked forward, not triumphant. Not vindictive, just steady. The sky above Norfolk stretched wide and blue as if clearing itself for the next chapter. And as the door closed behind me, I understood something deep and steady as a heartbeat under armor. Victory does not always roar. Sometimes it is the quiet step you take away from those who never deserved the sound of your boots returning. I did not win because the judge said so. I won because I stood without asking to be seen, because I did not break where they expected me to bow, because peace is earned just like honor, silently, steadily, without begging or bitterness. I kept walking. I did not look back. My battle was not to defeat them. It was to free myself. And freedom, like dignity, does not shout. It simply stands. They came as if the verdict had been a misunderstanding, as if truth in a courtroom could be undone by showing up unannounced on a gravel driveway with practiced sorrow and old entitlement. Late afternoon sunlight stretched across the Chesapeake field when their car rolled in slow and deliberate, like they wanted the land to believe they still belonged to it. I was sanding the porch railing wood dust clinging to my sleeves. Ranger lying in the shade watching the tree line with lazy vigilance. When tires cracked over gravel, his ears lifted body tense, then still waiting for my cue. I kept working until the engine cut off. Some people earn your attention. Some demand it. And some forfeit the right to it long before they realize. My father stepped out first, shoulders squared like he'd come to negotiate terms after losing a war, not ask for grace. My mother stood beside him, pearls around her neck, like habits she didn't know how to break. They looked smaller than they did in court. Pride takes space. Consequence shrinks it. Avery. My mother called quietly, using my name like a peace offering when for years it had been a disappointment, spoken soft enough to sting. I wiped sanding dust from my palms but didn't step forward, didn't invite, didn't soften. My father cleared his throat the way he did before delivering a sermon at the dinner table he believed was a throne. "We need to talk." The world had seen who they were, but old habits die slow. He looked at the house, the repaired porch, the fresh slats, the quiet steadiness of the place. They always loved the result, never the labor. "Money's tight," he said, finally. Voice, low, controlled, like he hoped dignity could be stitched back together by tone alone. Your mother's health isn't what it used to be. Bills pile up. Hard times. The hint sat there unspoken between syllables. Fix it. Step back into the role. Provide. Serve. Not as daughter. As utility. My mother's voice followed softer sugar mixed with regret. We thought maybe we could start over. Family should stick together. I rested one hand on the porch beam, feeling its strength under my palm. Their timing wasn't mercy, it was necessity. Poverty humbles pride in ways apology never could. I said nothing. Silence stretched. My father exhaled sharply, mistaking quiet for hesitation, not decision. You've always been stubborn. You proved your point in court. Enough already. He gestured toward the fields, the house. This land, this family, it's yours. Now act like it. Ranger rose slowly, not threatening, just present. A soldier's dog knows when the air thickens. I finally spoke, voice calm enough to cut without force. When I needed you, you called me weak. When I served you, called me shame. When I stood alone, you laughed. My father's jaw flexed. That's the past. People change. My mother nodded, quick, eager to catch the momentum of his attempt. And you're stronger now. You can handle life better. Maybe we can too. Their logic, now that I survived what your neglect forced me to, I owe you the benefits. I straightened, wiping dust gently off my sleeve as if clearing history off my skin. You once taught me to survive alone, I said, tone steady. I learned well. My mother took a small step, hand half raised, like motherhood was something you could return to when convenient. We're asking for help. No shame in needing help. Shame only exists when truth interrupts pride. I met her eyes and didn't blink. There's no shame in help, just in only offering love when you need something back. My father's face hardened, voice cracking under the strain of dignity stretched too thin. You think you're better than us. I shook my head once. I think I finally understand you. Rage flickered, then panic underneath, because understanding cuts deeper than accusation. It means the illusion has died. My father pointed toward the porch, toward the flag I restored, toward the swing I rebuilt by hand. You wouldn't have that without us. My voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. I wouldn't have scars either. He flinched. Quiet landed like judgment. My mother clasped her purse tighter. So that's it. You turn your back on family. I looked past them to the fields, the house, the horizon. I didn't turn my back. You closed the door first. I just didn't reopen it for you. My father's face collapsed into anger again because some men only know two emotions control, and the absence of it. We cared for you the best we could. You ruined this family. I breathed in slowly, letting salt air settle in my lungs. Not revenge. Boundary. Difference matters. My voice did not raise. It didn't need to. I walked toward the door wood, cool beneath my hand. I didn't offer a farewell or a promise. I opened the screen just enough to step inside. Before closing it, I said the sentence they'd once used like a weapon, returning it without bitterness, only truth. You made me strong enough to stand alone. Now I am. The door clicked shut, not slammed closed. Ranger sat beside me, tail resting, quiet eyes on the window, but body angled toward me like he knew this wasn't war, just release. Outside, engine started. Gravel shifted. Pride reversed slowly down a driveway where authority used to stride. I didn't watch them leave. I didn't need to. I leaned one hand against the wall and exhaled the kind of breath that feels like setting a pack down after miles. Freedom isn't loud. It isn't triumphant. Freedom is simply the space where pain used to live and no longer does. Not revenge. Boundary. And boundaries, like healing, are quiet victories too. Restoration is not a single moment. It is repetition. It is the same nail driven straight, the same dirt brushed away, the same sunrise seen through tired eyes and grateful breath. It is work without applause, healing without witnesses. Days after I closed the door on my parents, the farm settled into a rhythm that felt like truth. I rose early, not because duty demanded it, but because morning light across the Chesapeake fields felt like a promise worth waking for. Mist curled low over the grass, cool air thick with salt and dew. Birds cut the quiet with steady calls, and the world smelled like wood and river and things that had survived. Ranger followed me out the door, each dawn stiff joints easing as he moved faithfulness in every slow step. He stretched once, shook off sleep, then settled at the porch edge like a sentinel whose battles were mostly memory now, yet whose loyalty never retired. The swing came first. I measured the frame like my grandfather once taught me, with patience, not hurry. The ropes had frayed and the wooden seat sagged tired from years of weather and neglect. I sanded the board smooth, each stroke of paper softening roughness the way healing sands down hurt. Then, fresh stain warm brown, seeping in like memory, sinking deeper instead of fading. When I rehung it, the wood creaked not in pain, but like a voice waking after long silence. I sat on it carefully. It held. It always had, even when people did not. Next came the flag. I planted a new pole in the yard hands, pressing earth firm around the base the way we once secured lines on the deck. When I raised the flag, wind caught it immediately, no hesitation, just lift and billow. Red, white, blue against endless Virginia sky. It snapped sharp in the morning air, loud enough to echo across the fields, crisp enough to feel like declaration I serve what is honorable, not what is inherited. Neighbors drove by, sometimes trucks rolling slow on the gravel road windows, lowered just enough to offer a wave. Not pity respect, the kind that comes when someone watches you build instead of break. One older man nodded once, slow and deep. In the military, that gesture means I see you. Carry on. I cleared brush from the yard, cut back vines that strangled the porch posts, and mended the fence line panel by panel. Soil crumbled under my nails, sweat dampened my collar, and every bruise on my body, old and new, felt like it found a place to release itself into the ground. Healing is not ceremony. It is labor, and labor is prayer when hands know what heart cannot yet say. Ranger watched from the shadehead, resting on his paw's tail, thumping lightly now and then, like he approved the pace. Sometimes he rose nose nudging my elbow as if reminding me to rest, to breathe. In war, we learn to endure. In peace, we must learn to pause. By afternoons, sunlight stretched long and gold across the fields, touching everything it could. Warmth soaked into my shoulders as I sat on the swing, boots brushing dirt. Ranger leaning against my leg. Wind whispered through cornrows and oak branches carrying scents of cut grass and river and faintly distant tobacco barns. Virginia air has its own kind of truth, steady, unapologetic, ancient. I thought about my grandfather often then, not as memory, but as presence. His compass hung on a nail by the door, catching light each afternoon. Hold steady. I had always thought it meant endure the storm. Now I understood it also meant cherish the calm. People talk about finding peace, but peace is not found. It is built, piece by piece, beam by beam, boundary by boundary. In the evenings I walked the fence line as dusk settled soft and purple over the farm. Fireflies blinked like stars at ground level. Ranger trotted beside me slower than years ago, but proud tail-high ears alert. Age does not dull a warrior. It simply refines vigilance. Sometimes I stopped and placed a hand on a fence post, feeling wood warm under my palm, feeling land hum beneath my boots. My life was not loud anymore. It was honest. No more rooms where I braced for footsteps. No more love weaponized as debt. No more shrinking to earn grace. Just wind, soil, work, a loyal dog. And dignity held without needing to defend it. At sunset, when the sky blazed orange before softening to deep indigo, I would sit on the porch steps, drink cool water, and feel sweat dry on my skin. Ranger curled beside me, nose against my knee. Sometimes I whispered softly not to him, not to the land, but to whatever part of me used to ache for approval. We are not alone. The breeze lifted strands of hair from my face and carried the flag's quiet flap through the air. I did not rebuild the farm to prove anything. I rebuilt it to belong to myself again. Pain had once lived here, but so did possibility. And possibility, when tended gently, grows roots deeper than hurt ever did. The world did not need to see this part. It was mine, earned, chosen. Sheltered in the golden hush of a Virginia evening with Ranger breathing slow at my feet and a swing that no longer sagged but held steady. Restoration is quiet. So quiet you don't notice the moment pain becomes past tense. Until one day, sunlight falls through the porch rail and you realize you are not surviving anymore. You are living. Veterans Day arrived with the sharp clarity of early November air, the kind that smells like wood smoke and frost on cut grass, the kind that wakes something steady inside your ribs. I had received the invitation weeks earlier from the principal of the local high school, a woman whose voice held warmth even through email. Our students would be honored if you spoke, she'd written. I didn't accept right away. Service and recognition don't always hold hands. But rebuilding the farmhouse taught me something hiding strength serves no one. When the morning came, I pressed my khaki service uniform with quiet care. Not the dress blues this time. Those were for battles. This was for building. Ranger watched from his bedtail, tapping slow approval. "Hold the fort," I murmured. He sighed in that old warrior way, head settling back on his paws. Wide windows framed a pale sky when I stepped outside. The flag lifted in the light breeze, whispering instead of snapping, like even it understood today wasn't about proving, it was about presence. The school gym buzzed when I walked in. Metal bleachers clanged under student feet banners hung in school colors, and a brass band tuned in warm discord. Kids whispered before falling quiet like the hush that comes before a ceremony on base. The principal greeted me at center court, her hand warm, eyes sincere. "We're lucky to have you." I nodded in thanks. I had learned humility not from doubt, but from grief. Medals weigh heavy when you remember the names behind them. The microphone stood waiting. I didn't grip it. I didn't pace. I simply stood the way I learned, to feet-planted shoulders, square spine steady. "Thank you for inviting me," I began. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "You'll hear a lot today about bravery, sacrifice, and heroism." I paused. Those words are true. But they aren't the whole story. Students leaned forward. Teachers stilled. "Service taught me many things," I continued. "The world is fragile. Lives change in a heartbeat. Strength looks different on everyone." I let a breath settle in my chest, calm and measured. But the hardest lesson I ever learned had nothing to do with combat. Faces softened. Curiosity turned inward. "Honor," I said slowly, "is silent. So is survival." A single breath rustled across the gym. "Sometimes the greatest courage is living through the things that never make the news," I added. "Standing when life tries to buckle your knees. Walking away from places that hurt you even when they call themselves home." Heads lifted. Eyes sharpened. Teenagers know the weight of being misunderstood better than most adults ever admit. "You don't have to be loud to be strong," I said. "You don't have to fight to prove truth, and you don't owe your peace to anyone who tried to break it." For a moment, the world held still, quiet as dawn on deployment mornings, quiet as the farmhouse fields at dusk. Then slowly, one student rose, then another, then the whole gym. Not clapping, not shouting, just standing. Bare respect, clean and full, like sunlight on water. My throat tightened the same way it did the day they pinned a medal to my chest, and I wished I could hand it to the ones who didn't make it home. I nodded once, acknowledgement, not pride. When the principal touched my arm after her voice was thick, "They saw you today. I saw them too," I said. Outside, late autumn wind brushed leaves across the parking lot. Kids waved as they left, not starstruck, just connected. That mattered more. On the drive home, the sky shifted from steel to soft gold. Cornfields blurred past. The farmhouse appeared as the road curved porch light, glowing even in daylight, waiting like a lantern left out for someone returning from long travel. Ranger met me at the door, tail slow, eyes bright. I knelt, rubbing the fur at his neck. "We did all right," I whispered. He leaned into my hand, a quiet seal of agreement. Inside, I hung the uniform carefully, palms smoothing the fabric like honoring a living memory. Then I reached for my grandfather's compass on the shelf. The brass warmed under my fingertips. The engraving caught the light. "Hold steady." It wasn't a command. It never had been. It was a permission. To stay the course. To rest without fear. To stand without armor when the world was no longer hostile. I set the compass down gently, like placing a final stone on a grave you've visited long enough to know peace lives there now, not pain. Evening settled slow and soft. I stepped onto the porch swing, creaking as I sat. Ranger curled at my feet, eyes half closed. Far off church bells carried through the air, not a summons, just sound. The porch light glowed warm against the growing night, not as beacon for someone else, but as testament. I did not wait to be welcomed anymore. My life did not hinge on a door someone else controlled. Home had changed shape, not a place inherited, but one reclaimed board by board, breath by breath, boundary by boundary. I watched the horizon bleed pink, then purple, then blue. No parade, no spotlight, just stillness earned. Honor is silent, so is survival. I leaned back, hand resting on Ranger's head, warmth rising from old wood beneath my feet. The porch light hummed steady and sure, its glow cast not for someone else's return, but proof that I had already come home. And this time, light belonged to me. If you've ever been punished for being strong, for choosing a life that did not fit the script someone else wrote for you, you are not alone. If family ever tried to make you small because your courage reminded them of their own cowardice, breathe. Your survival is already your victory. Some wounds do not bleed. They bruise the spirit. They bruise the memory. But they do not break you unless you hand them the hammer. Honor is not volume. Dignity does not shout. Justice does not always slam doors. Sometimes it simply stays standing when others expected it to fall. If this story stirred something quiet but fierce in you, if it reminded you that peace earned is louder than anger displayed, then stay here a moment. Let your breath settle. Let your spine find its place. And if you were ever hurt by the people who should have protected you because you dared to become more than they imagined, light one small candle in the comments. Just a single emoji, a single flame. And if you believe that silent honor outlasts noise, that strength can be gentle, that healing is not weakness, share this story. Someone out there needs to see the light you just carried forward.